Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to start our program. My name is Paul Demerit Jr., and I am the chair of the Canadian Council of Chief Executives. And I'm not wearing this to make you all think that business is really tough and rough. I actually had a skiing accident, so it's not related to our world. As you know, this council, or may not know, this council is made up of 150 business leaders from across our country. We meet several times a year, and we engage in active programs of research, discussions, and advocate issues to basically think about issues for our country and put our country before our businesses, is the vocation of this council. Today's meeting is a bit of a departure for us because on this occasion we are joined by a significant number of invited guests. A full list of participants is in your kits, but we are delighted to have you with so many distinguished people, both from government, education sectors, and a wide range of other organizations that play a role in preparing Canadians for success in our labor market. To all of you, therefore, welcome and thank you for joining us on this one-day conference on jobs and skills for the 21st century. I'm especially pleased to welcome young Canadians who have joined us, some of which will be here by video as well, either in person or by webcast, I should be saying. The issues that we'll be addressing are, of course, important to every Canadian. But it is really your future that we're going to be talking about, and your voice has to be part of this conversation. Before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to sketch a bit of a background about today's conference. About 18 months ago, our council embarked on this initiative. We call it Taking Action for Canada, Jobs and Skills for the 21st Century. As employers, we have a stake in ensuring that Canada is equipping its citizens with the knowledge and skills needed to succeed in an age of rapid technological change and an increasingly competitive global economy. But I want to emphasize we don't claim to have all or even most of the answers. That's why we're reaching out to others, in particular to experts in education and skills development, for their thoughts and ideas. Over the past year and a half, we have commissioned a dozen different papers and essays dealing with everything from teacher evaluation in our public school system to apprenticeship training, entrepreneurship, international education, and the future of Canada's universities, and the importance of employer-sponsored learning and development. The full list of papers is in your kit. If you have not done so already, we do invite you also to look at our reports on our website. Okay, we clearly have a packed program for us this afternoon. So I'd like to start by introducing our first speaker, which includes Fortune's Magazine 2011 40 Under 40 list as one of the hottest young stars in business. She has won numerous awards for her groundbreaking research on education reform and job market readiness across the Middle East, Asia, North America, Europe, and Latin America. Dr. Mona Mourshed is a director of McKinsey and Company and leads the firm's worldwide education practice. Among other projects, she oversees McKinsey's Generations Initiative, which is working to close the gap in global youth unemployment. Her goal has been to figure out what works and how we can give young people the skills and support they need to succeed. We asked Mona to help kickstart off our conference by providing an international context for our discussion. She's also going to introduce us to the fascinating and important new McKinsey study on Canada's path from education to employment, big theme for us today. The report, Youth in Transition, is being published today, and you all have copies of it in your reference material. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Mona Mourshed. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you here today and to be part of this very important dialogue about jobs and skills and employability. Before I dive into our research findings, let me just spend a few moments on what's led us to engage in this research agenda over the last 3 years, which is that in any given country, on any day, I can guarantee you that there is an article about how young people cannot find jobs and how employers are searching for skills that they cannot find. And the stories are tragic, and they repeat again and again and again. And so what we've been seeking to do, and at this point now we have surveyed over 15,000 education providers, employers, young people across 16 countries. We've looked at over 150 youth employment programs across 25 countries. And throughout it all, what we're really trying to understand is, what is this gap? What is it that is causing young people, employers, and education providers to look at the exact same issue and have very different interpretations of what they see? And so with that as the context, we obviously today have released the Canadian survey findings. And so as I go through, I'll talk both about our global findings, but place the Canada survey findings within that context. And I will also spend the bulk of my time talking about what we've seen that works, because this conversation is much better had as talking about the solution than just about the problem. So I'd first just like to share a few of the most salient findings that came out of the work. And the first is what we call the parallel universe phenomena. So time and time again, we see that when you ask employers, education providers, and young people the question of, are young people ready for the job market? You get very different responses to that question. So from employers and young people, it's in the 30 to 40% range here in Canada. And education providers, it's 83%. Now, before you come to conclusions about that, what I will say is that this pattern is mimicked in every single country where we have done this survey. And then the second question is always, well, what is it that is causing the greater degree of positive response from the side of the education providers? And so we then ask the question, are you looking at job placement rates? So what is it that makes you confident about where graduates are headed? And we find that 1/3 of education providers don't actually have the data to be able to respond to that question. And those that do overestimate. Again, we see this pattern again and again. Now, this is not at all to say that the education employment gap lies at the feet of education providers, not at all. What it is saying is that the perception of what are the skills that one must be in possession of, there's very different calibration of that based on to whom you speak. Likewise, when you look at young people and you ask them the question, so to what extent do you have the information that you need to be able to decide what to study and where to study? So you'll find in response rates in the 30s with regards to, do you know about wage levels? Do you know about different career path options, etc.? Do you know about job openings? So this is again saying that young people do not feel that they have the information that they require to be able to make informed decisions. And then you'll see this placed in the context globally. But by the way, I'm often asked, why is Saudi at 63%? It's because you will get a public sector job at the end of it. You may have to wait a few years, but the job will be there at some point. So again, there is this overwhelming picture of it's a data-free zone from each of the perspectives of the different parties. And that is one of the most troubling and one of the most acute causes of what we call this skills gap. Now, what we did in the research was to take 3 critical moments along what we call the education to employment highway. One is deciding to enroll, so what to study and where to study. Second is actually building skills. And then third is finding a job. And what we were trying to understand is what's happening at those points of friction. What is causing the difficulty at each of these moments? And so I'll just share just little factoids along each of them. So first, on what to study. there is constantly a massive debate in every country. To what extent should young people pursue academic programs versus vocational programs? And again, young people, and this is for Canada specifically, young people will say, and this is true across the world, that vocational education would better prepare them for the job market. They would equally say that social prestige of academic programs is much higher than it is for vocational. And so then when you come down to, well, what do they actually pursue? Those that would say that they would prefer to pursue vocational but actually do are a minority. Now, this is not destined. What we will equally say is the language of vocational versus academic is almost passé now. The way that countries have been able to get around this divide is by talking about professions. So for example, this microscopic chart that you cannot see is a list of 20 professions. And we asked young people to help us to understand the extent to which they were aware of that profession, whether they thought it was attractive, and then whether they pursued it. So this is about attractiveness. And what you'll see is that the traditional engineering, lawyers, doctors, medicine, et cetera, they continue to be popular. But things like web designer, IT tech are also equally popular as the strongholds of engineer, lawyer, doctor. And in some countries, they're even more popular than those traditional professions. Now, guess what? To be a web designer, or to be a digital marketer, or to be an IT tech, these are programs that today, there are programs that span 2 to 3 months to be able to acquire those skills. And so the way that young people respond and parents respond to a profession versus it's a vocational path or an academic path is very different. And those countries that have been able to really change the debate and find ways for young people to path themselves towards professions where there is demand is precisely by talking about the profession, creating buzz about the profession. And each profession has a different implied education path. If I now switch to how do young people learn? So Canadian youth are overwhelmingly saying that they prefer to learn through learning by doing, through actual experiential learning. Less than 16% of Canadian youth today are actually in programs where they can learn that way. Again, we see this pattern repeated around the world. When you then take the perspective of employers, and you ask them, so to what extent are you actually able to find skills for even entry-level jobs? We find that 1/3 of Canadian employers say that they cannot. And 1/3 of those say that they experience significant business consequences as a result of that. Now, there is a school of thought, and it's important to acknowledge it, that says, well, employers are being unrealistic, that they are expecting that education institutions are going to produce ready-made employees, and they are not living up to their responsibility to actually invest in building up their skills. And so we actually investigated that extensively. And what we found is that there is a spectrum of employers. So globally, and this is also true in Canada, there are about 20% of employers that are actually investing very deeply in skills development, and they're getting exactly what they want from the youth who are applying for jobs. You then have about another 40% that's investing somewhat. So they'll show up at the career fair, or they will go to the board meeting of an education institution, but they're not getting very much out of that investment. And then the latter group is simply paralyzed. They don't have the wherewithal, perhaps, to be able to invest in skills development. So the point of this is to say that there is a spectrum of employers, and we cannot paint them all with the same brush in terms of what is the motivation and in terms of the extent to which there is investment. And the fact that there are a set of employers, and a significant share, who actually do want to invest, but do not yet today have the effectiveness of that investment is cause for optimism, because by helping them to see the different interventions that can be useful, we can shift that. So 2 more factoids, and then I'll just turn to solutions that we've seen around the world. If I now take the perspective of young people, and this is really one of the most tragic findings of the research, that only 1 in 2 youth believe that their education helped them to find a job. And bearing in mind that these are young people who are responding after they have exited from the education system and they've been in the job market. Now, we've all seen the studies that show the lifetime earnings of a college graduate versus someone who just has a secondary degree. But the reality is that in that moment, when you are in the job market and you are getting rejected again and again and again, the perspective is that your education did not help you to find a job. And that then sets in motion a set of questions across entire communities. So with that, let me now shift gears to what does work. And as I mentioned, we surveyed and actually visited 150 youth employment programs across 25 countries. If there were 4 things that I would really pull out across those examples, these are they. The first is that those that are most successful, they target specific professions. So they are looking particularly for professions that are high scarcity or high churn, because these are the ones that employers care the most to solve. Second, they are, and in so doing, they are also pre-guaranteeing job slots with employers. And this is a very important point. So it's not a go into training and Godspeed. It is actually, here are a set of employers and consortiums where there are guaranteed vacancies, and so long as you get and have mastery over the skills, there are opportunities for you thereafter. The second is that once those professions are clear, it's defining what we call the 10% of skills that matter the most. So within any given profession, there are sets of activities that are done with higher frequency than are others. There are sets of activities that have greater impact on business performance than do others. It's identifying those activities that matter the most and then working backwards to the technical, behavioral, and mindset skills. And it's truly these 3 that are needed to really differentiate between a high performer and a low performer in that role. Third is to create what I'm going to call modular work readiness programs. So they're often also called boot camps. They can be 8 to 12 weeks in length. The point is this: they are short to encourage completion. They are very deliberately highly simulative and intensive, because that's how adults learn best. And literally every week, your proficiency is based on demonstration. And it's repeat and intensive practice. And then lastly, being mindful that the first 3 months that you're on the job is the period of greatest vulnerability. And so it's ensuring that there is enough of a mentoring system that is around young people while they're in those first 3 months, to ensure that when they hit a road bump, that they have the possibility to then pick themselves up and have someone to support them. So I'm just going to very briefly describe some of the programs that embed these learnings. And just due to time, I'll go rather quickly, but very happy to take questions afterwards. So first strategy, engage youth early. We see this in South Africa's Go for Gold program. This is a consortium of 20 engineering and construction companies who very deliberately target young people from junior year to identify STEM talent. And so they support them with science and math tutoring while they're in school. They then have an opportunity to have a 1-year fellowship or internship once they complete. And then those that perform well then are supported to go to college and get a degree in that discipline. These high productivity boot camps that I mentioned are an increasing phenomena, and I'll give you 2 examples. One is Dev Bootcamp, the second is Wipro. So Dev Bootcamp, this is a 9-week coding academy They literally will take people of any background. 25% don't even have a post-secondary degree. They simply have a high school diploma. Very intensive hands-on program. By the end of the 9 weeks, there's a 90% placement rate, and the average starting salary is $100,000. You look at Wipro. Wipro, obviously the Indian ICT powerhouse, they hire 15,000 engineering positions per year. Again, 30% of the young people going into those roles do not have engineering degrees. They have demonstrated quantitative aptitude through a filter exam, and then based on a 12-week boot camp that Wipro itself conducts, they then essentially, and Wipro itself will say this, that they are performing at the same level of productivity as someone who actually does have an engineering degree at the entry level. Third example, Huntington Ingalls, which is a shipbuilding company. This is the case of when an employer realizes that their skill needs are so niche that it's difficult to be able to have a collaboration with a set of education institutions. And so they created their own. It's called the Apprentice School. And so they take, it's essentially 90% hands-on learning. Literally, when you look at the top management of Huntington Ingalls and even below, 80% of Huntington Ingalls Apprentice School graduates are still at the company. So they are finding that not only is this collaboration able to produce the skills that they want, but it creates much more employee loyalty, which is something that is also of great value. I'm now going to describe 3 coalitions which we see with great frequency. The first is partnering with competitors. So Amtech, which some of you may have heard of, this is the Automotive Manufacturing Technical Education Collaborative. It brings together over 30 auto manufacturers and over 30 education providers, so essentially community colleges or universities across 13 states in the US. This was born out of the realization that in the US South, none of these companies could actually find the skills that they needed, so Toyota took the lead. And Toyota literally produced a list of all the skills and activities that it felt any auto worker on the shop floor needed to possess. It then called together its competitors, and they then winnowed down that list of skills, and they now are able to, with anyone who has the Amtech brand, is uniformly viewed as having the set of skills needed. And what was quite interesting about this is they do not poach from each other because there is no need. Everyone who comes out of Amtech has the exact same set of skills. Another model is to partner with allies. So we've seen in South Korea, essentially a Chaebol partner down its supply chain because it realized that it had skill issues and quality issues because its supply chain did. And so this is another model for what collaboration can actually look like, and in a way to bring small and medium enterprises into the mix. And then lastly, we see partnerships functionally. So in particular, with regards to, in this case, mechatronics, this is a program called Apprenticeship 2000. And this is in North Carolina, 8 different companies that are in different sectors, all of whom have a need for mechatronics. And so they've partnered together in order to be able to work with the community college to develop a program that serves all of their needs. You'll see a very large number at the bottom of the slide. You know, so Siemens, which produces, it manufactures its gas turbines in North Carolina. Literally, they are paying $175,000 per student for the 4-year program, and that includes tuition and it includes stipend, etc. When you ask them, is it worth it? They themselves will say that the cost of a bad cut is worth $250,000. So yes, it's worth it. There are just 2 more examples here. I'll just give you one in the interest of time. So this is ILNFS in India. This is one of the largest Indian private training providers. So they support over 100,000 young people per year. And what they've done is they've essentially made it modular. And they essentially say, look, a student and their parents is only going to invest in a training program if the equation works, meaning that a young person can recoup within the first month of their entry-level salary the cost of the tuition of being in the program. And all of their activities are geared towards that equation. So I'm just going to pause here, and we can go to questions. And then if you have questions, I think we only have 5 minutes for questions. But if anyone would like to discuss further, both myself and Ali, who's, Ali, do you want to just raise your hand? I'm very happy to engage in more question and answers beyond the time limit.
I see there's a question down here about the fourth row. Microphone coming. Chantel, put your hand up, please. That was Ali. He's not asking a question, he's going to answer them. Okay. Then we are open for questions. Here in the middle.
Good morning. Sorry, good morning. You said in building successful programs, part of it is defining the 10% of those skills for entry-level positions. Are those hard skills or soft skills? Because in university, we're always told you need to learn how to do teamwork, communication. But then when you start your job, those skills are needed, but then you have to learn the programs and the different systems in your workplace.
Sure.
So which 10% of those skills?
So it's both. And so let me just describe first the exercise itself, and then give a few examples. So what we did in the survey was to take a list of about 20 different skills, some soft, some hard. And we asked employers to what extent are these skills important in the particular profession, and to what extent do new hires have mastery over these skills. So what we found is that, by and large, most employers perceive a greater gap on the behavioral skill side. So, so things like the problem solving, the communication, all of the things which you just mentioned. That being said, we've spent a lot of time trying to understand what is the best way to teach behavioral skills. And what we found is that the best way to teach behavioral skills is when they are embedded in the technical context. So for example, if we are going to, imagine a manufacturing job. Being able to teach precision to detail or to communications or knowing how to ask for help, it's actually best learnt within the activity of whatever that IT tech or engineering technician job is. It's very difficult for someone to learn how to communicate well by learning that in a separate stream over here and then learning their technical content over here. It's about finding ways to integrate and embed. That's the best way to accelerate skills development.
Please introduce yourself when you ask your question.
Hi, my name is Kathleen O'Keefe. I'm a recent human resources graduate. I see a lot of value in the comprehensive bootcamp, and I would just like to know, how will employers perceive the bootcamp versus a 4-year university degree?
Sure. So think of the bootcamp as producing world-class beginners, right? That's how employers perceive it, right? So essentially, and particularly for professions that are more on the digital side, so things like coding or digital marketing, et cetera. It's not that there are necessarily 4-year degree programs that actually yield that particular set of skills. So the way that I at least think about the bootcamp is that it creates a world-class beginner. Now, in 6 months' time or in 12 months' time, as you're ready to make the next step in the career ladder, you will likely need another insertion of a bootcamp. Now, maybe it won't be 8 weeks, maybe it will be 1 week. But what we would say is that we increasingly expect education to employment programs to look increasingly like that. So you get the dosage of skill that you need to be able to support you with job 1. You now want to move to job 2, in comes the next dosage. Now, this is not to say that all of education will become this pattern, but we do expect it to be an increasing phenomenon.
One last question.
Great, thank you. Thanks. Matt McQuillan from Career Cruising. First of all, I just wanted to thank McKinsey for doing this amazing research. I've read a few of the pieces and incredibly helpful for this very tricky issue where there is a lot of misinformation, a lot of anecdotal beliefs about what's going on. So that's awesome to have some real data. And thanks to the CEO Council for supporting this. In terms of solutions, the question I have, what you recommended sort of 4 different ones that you saw I guess maybe there were 5, I don't know how many in total, but in each case, there's a fair amount of complexity around each solution. And I'm just wondering, did you see solutions that didn't involve so much organization and work in terms of the institutions and the level of collaboration required to sort of make that happen? Or did you really find that, hey, it's a complex problem, it needs complex solutions?
So there are scalable, so let me divide between 2 things. Is there any solution that does not involve employers walking into the world of educators and educators walking into the world of employers? No. Every solution that we found has that feature. And so that does require a level of dialogue and integration, et cetera. Now, separate from are there scalable models? And examples like ILNFS, and one which I didn't mention here, China Vocational, very much are, so each of them is getting to at least 100,000 young people per year. Now, what it takes to get to a scalable model are above and beyond the employer relationships, but there is, how do you mobilize learners? Because let's not forget, I mean, just because one side thinks it's a good thing doesn't mean that young people and parents think it's a good thing. And until they perceive a real return on investment to whatever they're going to pay as tuition, then they're not going to go down that path. And so we need to spend as much time figuring out how to make it attractive for them to want to go down this path as it is for how do you make sure that the curriculum and the delivery is consistent with the quality that actually yields young people who have the skills that they need for that first job.
Well, with that, please join me in thanking Dr. Mourshed for a really interesting presentation.